My wife cheated to feel alive, caught an incurable STD, and now no one wants to date her. Throwaway for obvious reasons. I never planned to write about this, but last week pushed me over a line I did not know existed. I am posting now because my phone lit up with a photo that made me feel the floor drop, and I need perspective before I do something petty. Before you judge me, hear me out, because I deserve the backlash and I am not looking for absolution. I need to pour it out somewhere that is not my kids or my group chat, and this is the only place that feels anonymous enough. This happened 3 years ago, but the fresh part is still happening. My wife told me she needed to feel alive, and that was the phrase she used to justify a series of choices that hollowed out our home. She stepped outside the marriage with someone from work while I was juggling late shifts and bedtime routines. I know this makes me sound naive, but I did not see it until it was already in motion. The obvious signs were wrapped in ordinary life, like office happy hours and new playlists and a perfume I could not place. Fast forward to the week everything came out. We were sitting with a calendar, planning our son's school conference, when she said there was something I needed to know. There was no shouting that night, just a confession that landed like a brick in water and kept sinking. She said she had been careless and that a routine test had come back with an incurable result. She did not cry, and I remember thinking that the absence of tears was worse than tears, like the room had lost its oxygen and I was the only one gasping. I got tested the next morning because fear does not wait for good timing. Sitting in the clinic felt like sitting on a ledge above traffic, every sound amplified and useless. I stared at a poster about communication and felt like it was heckling me. When my results came back clear, I felt relief tangled with rage, which is a cocktail no one warns you about. I know this makes me sound petty, but I resented her for turning my body into a coin toss without asking. We tried counseling because that is what adults are supposed to do when the house is on fire. We sat in a room with gray chairs and a plant that looked tired, and mapped out the pieces like we were inventorying a flooded basement. She claimed it was never about me, that she was trapped in numbness, that she needed to feel alive. I could not carry both her hunger and my own survival. Meanwhile, our son watched us with the suspicious calm of a child who has been forced to become a weather forecaster. This was 2.5 years ago, and we separated 6 months later. I moved into a small apartment with a view of a parking lot and a square of sky that felt like a ration. We split custody, and the handoffs became a silent ritual of backpacks and reminders and tight smiles. Friends picked sides, which is a thing you tell yourself adults do not do until you watch them do it. The story spread in the slow way that stories do in suburbs, through school drop-offs and barbecue chatter and the way people stop asking certain questions. Our son started biting his nails until they bled, and the school counselor called me in with that careful tone that says panic would be justified but not helpful. He drew our family as separate islands connected by a wobbly bridge, and I took the picture home and stared at it until the lines blurred. He asked if I was mad when his mother hugged him, and I felt something break in a part of me that is supposed to be sturdy. I put him in therapy and sat in the parking lot each week pretending to answer emails. Sometimes I just watched the door and counted breaths. Meanwhile, my wife learned to manage her diagnosis, and I watched her build a new routine out of pills, appointments, and cautious optimism. She said it was controlled and that she had learned everything about disclosure and safety, and I believed she was trying to be responsible. The anger never erased the pity, which sounds condescending even as I type it. I know I am not the victim of the disease, but I was collateral to the blast radius of her choices. If you have been there, you know how grief can team up with contempt and make a person smaller than they want to be. A year into the separation, we found a rhythm that resembled peace from far away. Birthdays were joined and stilted, school events were negotiated like trade agreements, and holidays were math problems with timers. I started dating quietly, which felt like learning to walk on a floor I did not trust. I was upfront with people about the mess, and there were moments of normal that tasted like cold water. Then last week happened, which is why I am here now and why my hands still shake when I type. My wife set up a dating profile and tried to do everything by the book, and I know because she told me the plan during a handoff like it was a tax filing. She wanted to disclose early, to avoid risking anyone else, and to keep her circle tiny and careful. She said she felt ready to be seen again, and I nodded because it was not my job to police her hope. A week later someone screenshotted her profile and posted it in a local forum with a caption that did not bother with compassion. The thread ballooned into a rolling boil of speculation, jokes, and blame. I watched strangers decide who she was and who I was and what our child would think, and it felt like being trapped behind glass while a fire spread. My phone buzzed with a text from a friend who said I should look at it now, and I made the mistake of reading every comment. I told myself it was not my problem anymore, but the words burrowed in and made a nest. The last comment was from someone who claimed to have receipts from her past, and it linked to something I did not want to recognize. That is the moment everything tilted, because the worst was not the thread, it was what came next. And now no one wants to date her. The link went to an old blog written by someone who said he had been with her before me, with photos that made denial hard. He described a pattern of impulsive leaps and soft apologies, and the comments were a fossil layer of people who thought they knew us. I do not know what was true on that page and what was invented, but truth was not the currency that night. Screenshots flew across group chats, then into DMs, then into the feeds of people who shared classrooms and car lines with us. A private mess had been given a stadium. My wife called me the next morning sounding like someone who had walked through a hailstorm without realizing it. 4 people unmatched her overnight and 3 others sent messages that were polite in grammar and cruel in intent. Disclosure had become accusation, and even the careful language she drafted with her doctor read like a warning label. She is not a monster, which will anger people who only see headlines, but she is human in a way that hurt me deeply. 2 things can be true at once, and living in that contradiction is tiredness that tastes like metal. I told myself to stay out of it, but self-control is a thin blanket in a cold room. I messaged the forum mod from a burner and asked them to take down the thread because it was doxing and medical shaming, and they replied with a generic note that sounded like a shrug. I considered posting a defense, then imagined our son reading it in 5 years and seeing his parents publicly litigate his origin story. I deleted 3 drafts and sat on my hands. I know this makes me sound sanctimonious, but sometimes doing nothing feels like the only mercy left. 2 days later our son came home with a silence that weighed more than his backpack. He would not say exactly what happened, but he asked if illnesses are secrets and if secrets make people unsafe. I told him that health is private and safety is about choices, then sat in the hall after bedtime staring at the baseboard because I could not cry in front of him again. The school said some parents had complained about exposure at events, which is not how any of this works, but panic ignores science. We booked an emergency session with his therapist and added another bill to the stack. My wife deactivated her profile, reactivated it with fewer photos and more disclaimers, then shut it again after a flood of rejections dressed as concern. People told her she was brave and then unmatched. Others lectured her about morality from behind usernames that advertised rescue dogs and gratitude journals. A few asked invasive questions about risk and protocols like they were interviewing a candidate for a job they had no intention of offering. She told me rejection echoes long after the phone stops buzzing, and I did not know what to say that would not sound like a verdict. I kept dating quietly and disclosed my situation in a different way, not diseased but complicated, not dangerous but messy. A woman I liked asked me if I could promise the drama would not leak into her life, and the only honest answer was that I could not. I am not the one with the diagnosis, but I am tethered to it through a child and a history and a zip code. I know this makes me sound self-pitying, and maybe it is, but the splash zone is real. We ended before we began, a clean cut that still hurt. My wife works in a field that talks a big game about inclusion, yet the look she gets at the office could cut glass. HR called her in to remind her about boundaries and office relationships, even though the one that started this ended long ago. Someone left a wellness brochure on her chair like a joke. She told me she is not sure if she is being paranoid or punished, and I did not offer advice because my lectures are spent. She is trying to keep her head down, but shame is not a hat you can take off on command. I wrestle with responsibility until 2 in the morning like it is a stubborn jar that will not open. If I forgive her publicly, will that help our son, or will it feed the crowd? If I continue to keep my distance, am I throwing her to the wolves, or am I honoring the boundaries I've led to build? I want to be the bigger person, but sometimes I'm just a person who is tired and broke and scared of the next call from the school. I am not proud of how often I have chosen silence because it is cheaper than courage. She joined a support group and met people who understood the math of risk without turning it into a sermon. For a minute I thought it might save her, the way belonging can stitch a person together. She went on a coffee date with someone from that circle, careful and fluent in the language of boundaries and disclosures, and she came home lighter. It lasted 3 weeks, which is an eternity in their world, then he ended it because his ex found out and threatened to limit access to their child. I wanted to rage at the unfairness, but anger keeps writing checks that no one can cash. I wish I could say I stayed clean through all of this, but I did something small and ugly that still wakes me at night. In the middle of that first thread, I posted a vague comment from a throwaway that confirmed details without context. I told myself I was correcting misinformation, but really I wanted the world to mirror my chaos. The comment became a screenshot that traveled farther than I expected and turned our life into a cautionary tale. I deserve the backlash for that, and I carry it like a stone in my pocket. So here I am, typing into the void because I do not know where else to put this weight. 3 years out from the first revelation, last week still managed to teach me new shapes of hurt. My wife cheated, caught something she cannot return, and is learning how fast compassion evaporates once it feels inconvenient. I am trying to raise a child who believes mistakes are not life sentences, even while the world writes one for his mother. The worst is not the night she confessed but the long after, and I am trying to live without becoming someone my son should not learn from.